Hi everyone, this is Rupert Brown here, representing the T-minus webinar that we have every second Tuesday of the month. We try to find the very best professionals, clinicians, therapists and researchers, and this evening I would really love to welcome our special guest, Dr Kathryn Fackrell. The title and the subject matter of tonight's questions and answers will be based around hyperacusis or hyperacusis and oversensitivity to sound. Now, Kathryn is a research fellow leading a program of research in hyperacusis at the NIHR Nottingham Biomedical Research Centre and Southampton University. Kathryn has experience and expertise in psychology and healthcare, particularly in tinnitus and hyperacusis assessments and management. Kathryn has and continues to actively involve herself with patients and healthcare professionals across Europe to develop and conduct her research. Please welcome Kathryn, and please, Kathryn, could you explain a little bit about your background? Thank you.
Hi everybody. So I have been working in tinnitus research now for about 10 years. I started when I was doing my undergraduate degree in psychology. I just started working with one of the researchers in Nottingham on some work then. And then I went on to do a PhD in tinnitus, but I particularly went into work to do with how we measure tinnitus. So questionnaires that you use. I tested one of these across the UK, and following on from that, continued to look in at how we measure tinnitus and did an international project where we look at the most important aspects of tinnitus that we should be measuring. During this time, I got a little bit of an idea of what was happening with hyperacusis. I got asked to look at one of the hyperacusis questionnaires, and it kind of just caught my attention. I was interested in the relationship between tinnitus and hyperacusis, and I realised that it wasn't actually being looked at as much as tinnitus is currently being looked at. So following on from that, I started to look into hyperacusis in the last 2.5, 3 years. So I'm still like a bit of a baby researcher on this side. I'm still learning lots of stuff. One of the main things that we were learning is that there's not been as much research done in hyperacusis, and we haven't looked across everything in the same way as tinnitus or other conditions. Quite often hyperacusis is referred to as tinnitus's baby brother or little cousin, because it's overlooked a little bit. Following from that, I've done a big international study where we looked at what are the unanswered questions for research. So we got patients and professionals to submit questions and tell us what they wanted us to look at. And one of those questions was around self-help, which is actually now where I specialised into, and developing an online intervention for self-help and hyperacusis. There you go.
That's amazing, amazing. Now, Kathryn, you and I first met because I saw you appeared on this BBC documentary film that we were all in, which was about tinnitus and sound therapy, and there were lots of people that were talking about their experiences, and it was a great way of hopefully raising the awareness of tinnitus. You were on it, and I remember then after I saw it, I kept hearing about you from Tony Stiver, the director of the film, and he kept saying Kathryn Fackrell is just amazing. It's just such a font of knowledge. So I only saw a little bit because they had to edit it. But what you were saying was just so mind-blowing that we met up, didn't we? I had to meet up with you in Southampton, and you were so generous with your time. We were there for most of the afternoon drinking hot chocolates and coffees, and you were just so generous with your time. And, you know, so I really thank you very much for coming on. It's really fantastic. So the big one to start with, Kathryn, what is hyperacusis?
Okay, so hyperacusis is a reduced tolerance or increased sensitivity to sounds that are perceived as normal to the majority of the population, or were perceived as normal to the individual before they had hyperacusis. So it's about, although we're using the word normal there, we're trying to bring it back to how people felt beforehand. So it's that oversensitivity to sounds that you weren't sensitive to before you got hyperacusis. For people that are experiencing hyperacusis, the sounds can be overwhelming, intense, painful, unpleasant, and can be frightening for them because they come in at them, and it can be any sounds at all. So this could be someone dropping some keys on the floor, could be perceived as really loud to this person, you know, washing up. So if you imagine when you're stood on the road and you've got an ambulance going past, how loud that feels to you. A person with hyperacusis would feel that that is how loud someone slamming a door is for them. So it's that kind of perception there.
I had it myself, and I'm sure countless of people have had it, Kathryn, and it was really complicating the matters of tinnitus. I remember when it was really at its most really dramatic, that I remember very well a postman knocked on the door, and I ran upstairs crying. It was just so loud. I couldn't cope with the loudness, and it felt like the pressure of it as well was really hurting me. And it was so strange. And I was a musician, I was recording an album at that time. So I do remember the most shocking aspect of it was what is happening to me, because it wasn't the same as just having tinnitus. Everything seemed larger and over exaggerated, and I became smaller as everything around me became much more prevalent in a world of audiological nightmare sounds. It was really horrible. So going into that one, Kathryn, would you say then, what's the relationship then between hyperacusis and tinnitus? Because there has to be one.
There is one. We are still delving into this, and I'm sure that everybody will be aware that we still always look into tinnitus and the source of tinnitus and the causes of tinnitus. And we know that there is something that happens between tinnitus and hyperacusis, because we know that, for instance, 40% of tinnitus patients will experience hyperacusis. We don't know the full connection of what's happening there. It's been looked into, but it's basically because your auditory cortex, so where your brain deals with the sounds you're hearing, because tinnitus is happening, where we believe that cells are firing and that's what's causing the tinnitus potentially. There's things to do with whether there's this after effect that causes the hyperacusis. So there's something in the mechanisms behind them that potentially link each other, because it's all to do with that, just something not switching off in your auditory system that could potentially be doing it. But the link there is we know there's the link. It's just, how do you, basically it's tangled together. How do we pull apart what is the problems associated with tinnitus to what's the problems associated with hyperacusis? And that's really hard to do, and especially if you think about the years that we've looked at tinnitus and trying to work out exactly what's happening in your brain and ears for that, to then add another layer where it could be hearing loss involved and hyperacusis involved, and it just becomes quite a complex web that we are slowly pulling apart. I often call the tinnitus and hyperacusis a bit like a big ball of string that you're trying to find the end for, and you're pulling each bits out, and you're just not quite getting to that nice piece of string being nicely put out, or your Christmas lights put out. So it's not really a full answer there, because I can't give you one, but the way in which you describe it is very accurate to how I have people describe tinnitus and hyperacusis together. It is a very different experience for both of them at different times, and they can kind of conflict against each other. You're hearing a sound at the same time as all other sounds suddenly become very much louder for you, and it can make it quite complicated.
That's a great answer, and because it's multifaceted, this problem. I mean, for me, it was the tinnitus that came first, and that was really comfortable for years and years and years. It was just triggered by a very bad accident, and suddenly this over-awareness of hearing, which was a kind of a bungled irrigation that went on in my ear, so to get rid of earwax. So suddenly, bang! It was just, everything was too much. The accident, and then having even more of an enormous sound kind of canvas in front of me, was just too overwhelming. And it was really complicated. And I really, my heart goes out to the people that have both, because I couldn't really then get a perspective on the tinnitus till really I'd mastered the idea of looking at the hyperacusis. But for me, I was very lucky because I was struggling. And so I had these earplugs. So I had all different types, Kathryn. So I'd have this in my ear, and then I'd have these. I still kept these. And that was even when I was just driving in my car. I mean, it was so complicated, and I couldn't get my head around what I had to do because it was just too complicated. that kind of gave me a respite. But then, you know, I'd only hear a loud sound when these weren't there. So even like the sound of a toaster or somebody putting a tray in the oven and slamming it, it set me back. It felt like another week again. So it was just a hopeless situation. It wasn't till I got hearing therapy for an afternoon, Kathryn, and I was able to just get some clinical information that gave me the facts as to what could hurt and what couldn't hurt me. And that really helped me. It was good for my mind. I needed to know what the rules of the game were, really, in a way. So it was then I started to have more sound that was being released. So I wasn't blocking sound in, and only using the ear defenders at times where I thought it was appropriate with loud music. So you're absolutely right. It was so complicated. Does the hyperacusis come first, or does the tinnitus come first? What's the order? Or there isn't one?
Chicken and egg, I'm afraid. So for your experience, it was tinnitus. For patients I've spoken to, their hyperacusis comes first, or, you know, vice versa. I've spoken to both. There was theory at one point that maybe hyperacusis is kind of the precursor of tinnitus, but that, again, there's too many people that experience it the other way. A lot of people actually, when they initially experience tinnitus, could also be experiencing hyperacusis in that moment, but they associate their experience with tinnitus. So when you first talk to people because tinnitus is so overwhelming when you first feel that experience, and the sounds are so overwhelming that you don't necessarily recognize the fact that your ears are suddenly more sensitive. And it's only when I've had patients where I talk to them and they suddenly realize that they have hyperacusis because I've been talking to them about this sensitivity of sound, and do you experience that? And they'll suddenly be like, yeah, but that's part of my tinnitus. And it's not, you know, we try and differentiate between them so that we can look at the treatments that are more appropriate for someone that's experiencing sensitivity as well as tinnitus and things like that. So yeah, chicken and unfortunately that classic chicken egg, who knows what comes first situation.
I know this is a simple question, but it's been asked by somebody, and I think the simple questions are really pertinent. I used to ask this question, and it's quite simply, is it possible for hyperacusis to go away? I know it was in my case, but is it more than possible for it to go away?
Yes, so it is. We especially find this with children. They grow out of, I wouldn't necessarily say grow out of it, but their auditory system adjusts with a lot, you know, sound therapies and getting used to sounds again. And we found that with adults as well, that hyperacusis, you know, can, if you slowly increase the sounds you're hearing and you slowly go back in, because one of the things that people that experience hyperacusis might do is to isolate themselves very sensibly. Your fight syndrome comes in and you protect your ears like you were doing, and you might not interact with society in the same way because it all hurts, it's painful. So then you need to readjust your ears back into sound, basically. So it's about upping your sound, and what we found is as people have done that, they've slowly got their hyperacusis will slowly get better, and it can, in your case, go and not necessarily come back. I've had patients where they felt like it completely gone, and then they can have another occurrence where they've gone somewhere to, you know, so one patient told me that they went to a concert, it was too loud, and the hyperacusis was back and it was worse. But we have ones where we have young patients and teenagers where they've just adjusted and they don't experience it anymore. So it is slightly different to tinnitus, that we know that there is this adjustment that definitely happens. We know that it will come completely go.
There is a lot of fear, isn't there, associated, you know, you were saying that earlier with hyperacusis, and I see it quite a lot amongst my friends and colleagues in music or any kind of art form where noise is involved, particularly when that might also be your career. So that makes the exaggerated feeling of anxiety a lot worse. And I knew that with hyperacusis, it really did make it really difficult to get my head around it, because I was also fighting to keep a career, and the career was involved in sound. But for me, it was the sound therapy, which I'll get onto a bit later on, that really helped me, actually, bathing myself in white noises and sound therapy itself, which I made it for myself. I found that by just creating my own sound and feeding it back to me, it really helped to distract and to desensitize my own tinnitus. But I found one of the most important things going back to that was this lovely woman called Penny Stannard, who really helped correct my way of thinking by just giving me wonderful clinical information. And I thought that was really, really important. So getting on to the next question about fear and anxiety related issues, has there been any study, or have you been aware of, with the business that you're in of research, that through isolation that we've been put into and these lockdowns, has that increased? We've noticed that it's increased the tinnitus, but has it increased the tinnitus because there's an oversensitivity to sound? I would imagine, I'm only guessing, that we're dealing with hyperacusis that is leading into tinnitus, maybe, or what's your take on this, please, Kathryn?
So I would definitely say that we've not, because we don't know the prevalence of hyperacusis in the same way as we do with tinnitus, and we don't have the society, we don't have the charity for hyperacusis, so we don't have the same sort of measurements of seeing that. So with the charities, they know, like the BTA knows that they are getting more calls on their helpline during all of this time. With hyperacusis, we know the same issues arise, in the sense that the fear and anxiety can make hyperacusis 10 times worse for someone. What we know from lockdown and all of these issues is actually where people have been reasonably comfortable in their houses. And if you think, when we went into full lockdown, how quiet was the UK in that time? It was, you go for a walk in the street and it was quiet. There was no cars, there were no traffic. It was a very, if you've got sound sensitivity, that is a great place to live. Like, it's quiet, you're in control of your own houses. I mean, the only people that did have issues were more where they're in flats and they might have had to deal with their neighbours a bit more, neighbour noises and stuff. But what we're finding now is, as people are coming out of lockdown, we're having a lot more issues with people not wanting to, that actually there is a potential growth in sound sensitivity, because we've all been in very quiet environments. So you can see my office behind me. I'm working from home. I'm in silence all day long. I'm used to being in an open plan office. So for me to go back into an open plan office where there's lots of noise will even be quite, for myself, where I know all about sound sensitivity, that'll be a bit of a shock to my system. So it is more likely that there's going to be people coming out that are going to feel a lot worse about this. And I recently worked on a piece of work with some people in audiology that deal with dementia and hyperacusis, because there's a link with that as well. And we developed a nice poster for the clinics to use to help. It's just kind of a bit of a help guide to how to re-interact with society when you haven't been for the last year. And, all of the kind of things that you're going to be worried about, and, the steps that you can take. So just little steps to begin with, going out the house. But that's definitely where we're seeing the problem with hyperacusis more than tinnitus. I think with tinnitus, the being at home, and just in all honesty, the anxiousness of this situation for the last year and a half will not help something that definitely gets louder when you're stressed and anxiety is raised. And potentially some of the people you're seeing coming out where they're reporting it more now is because they've been in a silent environment and they've suddenly recognized that they have it, whereas they may be used to being in noisy environments and stuff.
That's a really great answer. I've kept it at bay, but only because I bathe myself in sound, Kathryn. So even in my house, I've got 2 drum kits over there, so in the room that I'm in, and I've got a recording studio upstairs. So I'm always bashing around and playing about or teaching, and the house is quite a nice, hustly and bustly environment. It's called Harlem, and it's my imagination that I'm in New York, downtown, and I'm in the hustle and bustle. And I really enjoy and find sound of all descriptions. So windows are open in my house, not when I'm playing drums, but I like to just make sure that I'm getting sound from everywhere. I find that just really helps. And you are right, when we were going out and going for walks in lockdown, I mean, okay, obviously it was eerie, it was very strange, but it was magnificent. I really
Yeah.
loved it. Everything just seemed clearer, the clouds seemed more fluffy, the sea where I live just seemed cleaner. Cats and dogs in the street seemed happy. It just seemed like a flipping happier place. But
Yeah.
you're right. And I remember at the time thinking, I like it, but I need to make sure I engage with sound still, because it could be too beautiful actually. And you're absolutely right. For someone with the idea that I have tinnitus, and the idea that that hyperacusis may or may not come back, I certainly don't want to encourage it, that's for sure, although I would know what to do if it happened again. We've got another question, Kathryn. So it's from one of our community, and it is, would you say that hyperacusis tends to settle down in time without sound therapy or a specific treatment plan?
It's a hard one to answer. I know the sound therapy stuff more because that's the thing that's mainly done with the clinics in the UK. But we know from evidence that if it can just settle down, it can. So we just don't know how long that would take, and it tends to depend on the precautions you're taking. So when you say doing nothing, in the sense of if you were still going out and going to work and trying to do everything that you're doing, even though you feel the sound, then yes, it would slowly settle down because your ears are still being exposed to sound. If you're using sound protection all the time, so ear protection all the time, the problem with that is that every time you take them off, all sounds will be louder for you because your ears are continuously trying to adjust. Your hearing system is trying to adjust to the sounds that you're intaking. So the less sound you intake, then your hearing tries to basically turn the volume up. It's like, okay, we're not hearing well enough, we'll try and turn it up. So then when you take off these headphones, suddenly all sounds will be very much louder for you. So then in those cases, you wouldn't you potentially progressively get worse because you're actually reducing the sound that's coming into you. So where Rupert's keeping sound around him, that's like a really good thing to do. I spoke to people during lockdown that were keeping their windows closed. They were in control and they wanted to be in their quiet environment. And so when we talk about sound therapy at different points, really it's just about trying to keep yourself not being in silence. It's about just keeping a few sounds around you, adjusting them, going to the supermarket but at a quiet time. All of those sorts of things help, because as you slowly go back through everything, your hearing tries to adjust. Your hearing's always trying to adjust. It's always trying to turn it back on. And the way in which we always describe it is that it's like a volume switch, and your volume's just being turned up and we just need to slowly turn it down a bit. So yeah, I think it can adjust over time, if you were trying to progress your life as ordinarily as possible.
That's a great, lovely answer, Kathryn. Thank you. We have another one now. So somebody says here from the community, I know people with tinnitus who have hypersensitivity to sound, but they told me it is not hyperacusis. So does tinnitus contribute to a sensitivity to sound then?
Well, that's a hard one to answer. The way in which we would describe tinnitus is more to do with the ringing of, or however you want to describe the sound you're hearing, that sound ringing away. We wouldn't normally associate too much oversensitivity with tinnitus. That is when hyperacusis starts to step in. There is cases with tinnitus where you might become slightly more sensitive to sound. So I suppose it would depend on how they're describing it. But in general, we're trying to kind of define tinnitus, this experience of this sound you're hearing, and hyperacusis would be the sensitivity to all other sounds. If it's, for instance, if it's just particular to the sound that they associate with the tinnitus, that might be something slightly different. But yeah, it's something worthwhile them looking into. But I think I will say most tinnitus interventions that you're offered would potentially help your hyperacusis either way. So it's not necessarily a bad thing if it's not.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm trying to think of just from my own perspective when I had tinnitus really badly, and I didn't feel I ever had hyperacusis until I had it, until I had the second kind of bad hearing accident. And then, like I said, it was confounded by then having earwax removal as well. So it was all too much for my hearing system. But the first time I had tinnitus, although I had it really badly, I had 8 different tinnitus sounds. I didn't feel that I was really suffering from an oversensitivity to sound, I have to say. And so from my perspective, I never engaged with hyperacusis or had that. I know that until 2008, really. So sort of nearly 15, 20 years later, which was a shock. It was really, I never thought I could get out of it. It was like entering, I've always seen my own tinnitus as being in the tinnitus maze. So it's a maze that I feel like I've been plopped into, and nobody's showing me how to get out of it. And I keep going down tributaries or a dead end, or I'm going back to, or I've lost a place, or I've gone to jail, or I'm down in the snakes and ladders and I've lost another row. It's like one step back and about 1,000 steps, one step forward and about 1,000,000 steps back sometimes. It really feels like there's so much distance between recovery and just being stuck in that tinnitus maze. And it really was really easy for me to get out of the hyperacusis once I had the clinical information, actually. Once somebody sat down and told me what was happening, like you're doing, and just told me some of the things to think about, it was just like somebody had switched a light on. It's all I needed. I was doing everything else right. I was doing the sound therapy, and I was trying to be positive. I was trying to cut down on things like sugar and salt and things that I thought might just, trigger tinnitus or make me feel not very particularly in a good space. But it was the clinical information that was really just so amazing, which is what you're offering tonight, Kathryn. It's really brilliant. So are there any risk factors associated with having hyperacusis, Kathryn?
I'm going to slightly face another screen now, because we've recently done a project. We've recently been doing research has so many weird terms for everything. So we do systematic reviews in research, and this is where we would look at all the research that has been done on a particular subject, and we would have inclusion criteria. So we'd have criteria that we want to look at across these papers that have been done, because we always publish our research. So with the systematic reviews, this is one of the ways in which we can look at prevalence figures or risk factors that have been associated with them. And what we do is we look across all the research and we pull in anything that's hyperacusis and anything that they say risk factors, and we make sure they're right. So we've recently this has literally just been done in the last month or so, looked at some of the risk factors in hyperacusis. Now, I'm sure you're aware, but we don't necessarily diagnose hyperacusis right now. So some people will be self-reported hyperacusis, and some of them will have been to their clinician and been told it's hyperacusis. So whenever we look at risk factors, we do kind of separate them out in that way. So the ones that have been diagnosed or by a clinician, we'll look at them versus people that haven't. So for people that risk factors around people that have been clinically diagnosed, post-traumatic stress disorder has been associated with hyperacusis. And at the moment, the risk factors that we're looking at are more around conditions that are linked, rather than sort of if you were drinking a glass of wine, whether that would make a difference. But obviously, tinnitus is associated. Migraines are associated with hyperacusis, irritable bowel syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, anxiety disorders, and just depression are associated. So quite a lot of them are very similar to what we've seen with tinnitus as well, kind of the associated risk factors there. Muscle disorders. So it's quite a lot of, interestingly, quite a lot of other medically unexplained kind of conditions all seem to be interacting with it. Migraine is one of the ones that's quite commonly reported, which, as someone that suffers from migraines, I would say that during my migraines, people either can have visual problems with their migraines or hearing problems. I'm definitely more down the sound side. So whenever I get a migraine, it's definite silence. Otherwise, yeah, it gets progressively worse. But we've found that a lot of people are reporting that problem with the kind of sound sensitivity continuing after a migraine and actually carrying on. In self-reported hyperacusis, again, same sort of problems are being reported, but then you've got things like ADHD has also been associated with it, and that's probably, and panic disorders. So yeah, there's something there with other conditions. This review didn't actually find anything on dementia, but we do know that there's a big link between dementia and a lot of sensitivities, so not just sound, but sound is one of the ones that they're having quite a lot of problems trying to deal with as well.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great answer. I wanted to be careful about this next question, but I feel I have to ask it. I have my own personal views on it, but I would love to know what you think, which is there a connection between hyperacusis and mental illness?
As I just said, with the risk factors, there's definitely something in there with depression and anxiety, and even you know, post-traumatic stress syndrome is associated with mental health. The problem, it's probably very similar to tinnitus in the sense of, again, it's this chicken and egg situation, is we'd never know whether it was an anxiety that kind of could have been one of the potential kind of reasons that the sensitivities started happening. If you think about it from a kind of very logical point of view, when you're anxious, your whole body is very kind of tense, and you can feel shaky, and you feel quite sensitive. Your skin can feel quite sensitive. So you know, it's quite a logical move that your hearing could become sensitive in that moment. You could feel very sensitive to sounds, and even visually, when you're anxious, your visual intake can be much worse, and you can feel that you're not taking everything in. I will say that there's definitely one of the kind of problems that's associated with having hyperacusis is mental health problems, in the sense of people that have hyperacusis report problems with anxiety and fear and depression, problems with sleep. So there is something going on. It's just quite a lot of, you know, again, logically, if you've got hyperacusis and you're living with that every day, then there's going to be anxieties about leaving the house. There's going to be fear about what it all means. And, you know, if you're slowly isolating yourself from people, then you know, that could definitely lead to mental health issues with depression. And, you know, that's what we've seen from this COVID pandemic. If anything, if you see, the mental health of the nation has gone up because we've been removed from interacting with people, and you don't realize how important that is till you've taken it away from you. So yeah, long answer, but there's something there. I just wouldn't say which way it would go. I couldn't say.
No, thank you very much. That was very sensitively answered. Thank you, Kathryn. We have a question here, and it's from a lovely person that is part of our tinnitus community. And what they've said is really polite, because they're saying they're not sure if this is for a hyperacusis question, but they would love to ask you anyway, if that's okay, Kathryn. Yep. Which is, can tinnitus or hyperacusis be a sensation in the ears and not a noise, such that I have a very fast, constant rhythmic twitching sensation in my ears after exposure to loud noise, but no noise associated to this? If it's not tinnitus, then what do you suggest I do? That was the question.
I'm not really sure how to answer that one. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying it was tinnitus or hyperacusis from that description. Anytime you feel anything like that with your ears, or anything where it feels that it's kind of a pulse, I would be going to your GP and just reporting it to them. My first reaction with anything to do with tinnitus is always go to your GP, discuss it with them, and they will go through all of the things that they should be and referring you to all the right departments. And if it's not tinnitus, they'll still know more than me at this case from that description. I wouldn't want to recommend anything else or say that it is tinnitus. It's not a description I've heard before, is probably what I would put it as.
Yes. Thanks, Kathryn. Thank you very much. Here's one that's close to my heart, a question, because it happened to me, but I'd like to hear your take on it. Dear Kathryn, is microsuction a bad idea if you have hyperacusis?
I wouldn't recommend doing microsuction for if you have hyperacusis, or you know, make sure that from everything I'm told by audiologists that I work with, they don't necessarily recommend having microsuction if you can avoid it in the first place. But if you're having it done, make sure you have those discussions with whoever's doing it beforehand. Make sure they are someone that's qualified to do it, so that they're aware that you already have these issues with sound sensitivity or tinnitus or whatever it is. Yeah, that would be my answer to that one, I think.
It's a good answer. I mean, I have a very good relationship with my ENT consultant, Dr. Faraj on the Isle of Wight, and he's fantastic. He's very gentle. He talks about what he's going to do, and I have complete and utter trust in him. So, and he really sometimes will say to me that he sometimes likes to be led by the patient. So, for example, I might have a choice, and I remember he asked me about my situation, and I did have the microsuction a few times, and it was very successful. And maybe it made the tinnitus a little bit, maybe a little bit louder, but it didn't last long at all. It was only maybe for a couple of hours or something, but it wasn't really that much. And I also wondered whether I was looking for it also. But so I can honestly say from my experience, but that was only my experience with hyperacusis, that actually it was okay. It was perfectly safe for me. But the way I have it wax removed, and I had it actually yesterday, once every 5 to 6 months, was with just the kind of scraper, and that was really nice. It might be a bit of a strange sensation, the idea that somebody's scraping the wax out of you, but it doesn't hurt, and it's doesn't make any noise, and it's a really nice therapy, and it feels great to have that removed safely afterwards. So that's kind of what I would have myself anyway, if I had a sensitivity to sound. But you know, I think there are lots of options out there.
Yeah.
Okay, I have another question. Sorry, Kathryn. Sorry.
It's just be, so you've gone to an ENT, so you've got someone that is working with ears every single day, and I think that's the key to some of these things, is making sure it is someone that can do these things. Microsuction is one of the safest options for doing these things, but it is making sure you've got the right person doing it and they know all your history. And like you say, if you've got the choice to say no, say no. If you want to, it's up to you. But yeah.
That's lovely. I think that's it. I think there is so much more choice. Oh, we have something. Somebody just came in on the screen that said for them, sadly, microsuction encouraged their hyperacusis. I can quite imagine it might do. Yeah.
Anything you do that it's such a hard one, because your ears being blocked could cause your tinnitus to be worse because your ears are blocked with wax, but then at the same time doing something to your ears, anything that's going to jostle your eardrum or anything like that, there's always a little bit of risk involved in all of these things that we do. And it's a hard one. It is down to trying to make the best possible decision that would help you in that time. And I think it is a hard decision to make, that one.
It is really, isn't it? I sort of see that as being, Kathryn, part of the tinnitus family toolkit, really, and that would be one of my serious parts of my own toolkit is to develop a relationship with a clinical practitioner, health professional. You know, I have a great relationship with Dr. Basavaraj, and it means a lot to both of us, because he really enjoys the idea that a patient is talking to him and I'm listening to him. And the same thing with Susan Paul, the audiologist at the hospital, who's fantastic. So I think it's with anything, it's the same as if I'm working with somebody, with James or Silas, or you're working with your team. Just being able to talk and have a great proper understanding, which is truthful and honest, and there's respect, I think it's just highly important, isn't it? Everything. So that helps with that kind of factor of control. You know what's going on. There's not a surprise. What happened to me when I had a terrible catastrophic accident with my own ears was that I didn't really have any fallback. I went for the nearest thing to have earwax removal. I didn't do my research in a way, and I should have really had a plan B and a plan C. And I think I've learned from having hyperacusis that I like to have different kind of plans in place. It is part of the kind of control mechanism and part of that tinnitus toolkit. Even though I don't have hyperacusis, I'll still travel if I'm going away with a pair of these. If I'm flying, I like that when I'm flying. I still have my white noise generator. I have the sound therapy with the T- app. It's like I've got my toolkit. And again, I've got my information. So I've carried all of the British Tinnitus Association leaflets. And, you know, I've found them so useful over the years. You know, then we've compiled our own, and we have you that is advising. It's like I save everything. All of my notes are saved, and they're all part of that tinnitus toolkit, I feel, that really helps. It just gives you a sense of your own perception of what is good and what is bad. Is that going to hurt me? No, it's not. I'm going to be fine. Can I do that gig? Yes, because the sound isn't bad. Be happy, enjoy it. And I think that's the kind of thing. The information has meant that I now really enjoy my hearing life and my world. I still have tinnitus, but I don't react to it in the same way that I would have done before. It's not frightening. It's not going to hurt me. Maybe I might have a spike, but it's okay. It's not a problem. It happens. Maybe I had one too many coffees, but to hell with it. I love coffee. I'm going to have another coffee and encourage it, maybe. I don't know. So I think it's just having a healthy sense of perspective and getting the information, I think, is really, really important. We've got another question, Kathryn. So the next question is this. I have a nickel eustachian tube in my ear, which I think caused my hypersensitivity. During lockdown, it was so quiet. I had my windows open, but now I am unable to have my windows open for long, as I feel like I'm standing in the middle of the road. My road is not a busy road. Any suggestions on how to get used to it again?
So one of the things that it's always those slow, small steps of what you can do. So if you can open the windows of your house for a bit, so you're hearing the road, but it's, you know, as you say, not a busy road, but you're hearing the sounds that are happening outside before you go outside. It can be that you just try and get yourself used to certain road sounds, maybe have record, you know, I'm sure there's definite recordings of road sounds and you can play those. A lot of the time we suggest with people is just to take those smaller steps. So give yourself a bit of a plan of, I'm going to sit in the garden, if you've, you know, got a garden, or I'm going to sit outside and I'm going to give myself 5 minutes out there and then I'm going to come back in. Or if it's going okay, I'm going to stay out there a bit longer. Or I'm going to try and walk to my neighbour's house and back and be out on the road, and then I'll try a little bit further. It's all about just small steps to just try and go that little bit further and a little bit further, because you will slowly get used to the sound a little bit more and more. And if it's specific sounds that are really, you feel like are the worst ones, build up to those. Don't, you know, unfortunately, if road sounds were the worst ones, then you'd have to kind of build up to those in your house and things. But yeah, like try and build up to everything that you're doing. This is probably one of the main kind of treatments that we'd use for hyperacusis is just slowly kind of trying to desensitize, but using natural sounds, using your environment that's around you, and just having things in your toolkit if it doesn't work out. So carry it, you know, carry your headphones with you, have them there ready, and if you're finding it's too much, put them on, wear them for a bit, and then go from there again and try and take them off and wear them again. Or if you're in a louder environment and you just can't cope, walk away, find yourself a safe place that you feel that you can calm down, keep calm, and not get overly anxious about the sounds that you're hearing. And just, so we've done lots of stuff with people where they're saying that actually just picking out where to stand in a room or where to stand on the road is one of their key things. So don't stand too close to the edge of the road and nearer to your kind of houses as you walk along. But just carrying something along that will make you feel safe if you need to.
That's wonderful advice. It's wonderful advice. I mean, it's the reason that I made the sound therapy, Kathryn, and why I went really extensively into different environments, Kathryn. It's so strange because it's exactly really prevalent for what's happening now. That's why I wanted to create an industrial series amongst all the others, because it was really for very selfish reasons to start with, to help me, which was the fact that for me, plane travel was, I couldn't do it. I didn't travel on a plane for about 10 years because sound was just too frightening. It wasn't just the plane. It was the boat that I had to go on. It was the taxi that was vibrating and creating more tinnitus. Then the boat, which was vibrating and creating more tinnitus and oversensitivity. Then I went on a train, and then I went on another train. Then I went on a tube, and then I'm about ready to fly, you know, and the whole thing was an absolute nightmare. So it was designed deliberately to desensitize and to get people used to that environment. And I, again, it's like it worked for myself, and that's one of the reasons why I got over my hyperacusis, Kathryn, was to create, for example, the idea of standing in a road, even when I had hyperacusis, was unacceptable to my hearing system. I couldn't handle it. So I would walk at 3 o'clock at night and start my day back to front. So I lived a nocturnal lifestyle for about 3 to 4 months, I remember. It was the only way that I could kind of cope with that sound. So I started then to ponder that when I was making the sound therapy. So I would go out then, once I was slightly better and I felt a little bit more in control with my own auditory system, I would record the sound up front of motorbikes and cars. And in a sound environment, by creating that sound in my studio and going back and exploring those sounds, I was able to position them in a way that was really comfortable for me. So what then used to happen is I would go out and hear those sounds, but in a sense, it was like I was brainwashing myself. I was making that sound that I was hearing comfortably in my own environment.
Yeah,
it was transporting itself outside. So that tolerance that I had in the studio and safety that I felt translated in any other environment. And that's what really helped me, Kathryn, because I knew that would be the only way I could deal with it. Yeah. Flying now is wonderful. I love it. I'm excited. It's a shame I can't travel because it's one of the best things that I could ever do, is to travel to a beautiful country and to love those sounds. So I love the sound of planes. I love the sound of airports now. I love trains. I like the vibration. It's like once I'd worked out that the sounds weren't going to hurt me and I was able to desensitize with sound therapy and great clinical information, it was a whole different environment. Suddenly I could go out there again and bask in it and really enjoy it. I do make myself listen to ambulances, which you might think might be a bit crazy, but I won't do that. And it might mean that the tinnitus is a bit bad for a while, but again, I've had to make myself not cover my ears up, which means actually I don't now. My reaction is to do that, which means that I will feel effect, but I have to do that, Kathryn, because I do not want to go back to doing that again. I just don't ever want to go back to that world, because you know, I know that sound of an ambulance, as long as it's not directly in my ear, as long as it's not for half an hour and it's right next to me, I know that if it's just going by, I know that it's good to engage in it and let it just happen, I think. What would you say? Would you that a little bit dramatic, or would you
I mean,
recommend just
yeah, I mean, if you looked at anyone on the street as an ambulance went past, even when they go past and you're driving in your car, your reactions are to kind of cover your ears, or at least, yeah, tense up. I think I'd say a lot of people do. I think some of it is there's a control there, and as you said, like getting something used to in an environment where you're really comfortable is one of the best things to do, because you're not anxious, you're at home, you're comfortable, you're sitting there, and you're just getting used to those sounds. Ambulance is probably a sound that you don't necessarily need to get used to, I will say. Most people don't like them. They're loud for a reason. They've got to be heard over car radios and everything else that the world creates. But it's those moments where, if you can get used to all of the other sounds in our environments, in an environment where you're happy, which is what you've done there, it does mean that when you're outside in that environment, you remember feeling comfortable in your house with those noises. So it does help that interaction. Things like aeroplanes, cars, they're the ones that we're reported more often to be a problem with hyperacusis, because you're in a tin can of a car. Your car is an acoustic ping pong ball, basically. So a lot of people will struggle in those environments, trains. And if that is where the struggle is, then that's where you do look after, if you're traveling for a long time on a train, wear ear protection if that's going to help you in that moment. And it won't, as long as you're not wearing this ear protection all day long, every moment you can, wear it where it feels sensible to you. You wouldn't walk into a concert necessarily that's really loud without looking after your ears. The underground is horrendously loud. I generally always have headphones of some sort when I go onto the underground, because it is loud. So it's those kind of recognition of where is good to wear it, where you feel comfortable. But yeah, cars, planes, enclosed spaces like that, which is unfortunately why with children a lot hand dryers come up, because if you think about a bathroom setting and then the height of the child, then that's why hand dryers are much louder to children than they are to adults, because we're that bit above the noise. But yeah.
Okay, we have another question here, which is, what connection, Kathryn, is there between hyperacusis, tinnitus, and hormones, i.e. peri-menopause?
I haven't done much research in this area at all, I will be honest, and I will say that I know that there has been some links between tinnitus and menopause, because obviously your hormones are going through lots of changes, and unfortunately when your hormones go through lots of changes, then it does lots of different reactions. So I know lots of people that suffer from really badly with chronic headaches when they're going through peri-menopause and menopause. So it is reasonably, I'd say it could be quite likely that there is something that goes on with sensitivity at that point, because your hormones are changing so much. So you could have something that happens with hyperacusis as well. I don't really know the level of risk factors to do with the hormone changes in tinnitus and hyperacusis, though. I know that people have discussed them being linked.
Okay, that's great. That's a great answer. We've got, I think, probably maybe one or two more. Okay. And it's a question that I wanted to ask, and someone's got in there. I'm really pleased they have. And I think it was probably one of the second questions I ever asked you, because I'd read so much about it, and it kind of seemed like people wanted to back off from answering this. And you answered it straight away, which was, what is the difference between hyperacusis and misophonia?
Okay, I thought that one might come up.
Remember me asking you that?
Okay, so my description with hyperacusis is the reduced tolerance to sounds, and that's any sounds, everyday sounds. It could be anything. With misophonia, it's basically the the definition, so I'll give you the definition, then I can describe, is an abnormally strong reaction to a specific sound or pattern of sounds, meaning that an individual will have this adverse reaction to generally human generated sounds such as eating and breathing, and the response might be quite angry and rageful, basically. So yes. With hyperacusis, the descriptions that were given by patients and by people that I work with, so I work with a lot of people experiencing hyperacusis, they would say that theirs is this overwhelming feeling of sound. Like you said, with the pressure, that's quite often described. It's pressure, it's overwhelming, and it's painful. But they don't necessarily have a rage response to it, and it won't be specific sounds. So the one with misophonia that's most often reported is people eating and chewing, and where they literally want to hurt the person that's sat at the table with them. I know people that will not eat with their family anymore because they cannot stand the chewing, but that is literally the only way they describe it. And they'd say it feels loud to them, the chewing's loud, but it's that it just penetrates, and it's irritating them, and it's making them feel very, very cross. With hyperacusis, you know, obviously occasionally you're going to feel angry with your hyperacusis because somebody's just dropped a plate next to you and that really hurt. But that's how that might be described. So the children in the table next to you are being quite loud and you're getting angry because it's hurting you. But that's how patients would describe that to me. Whereas with misophonia, it would definitely be they're doing this deliberately and they're doing it to annoy me. So yeah, they do link a little bit, but we try and differentiate between the two.
Yes. The last one, actually, I think, so this is our last one, and it's about road sounds. And the question is, Kathryn, I find normal road sounds okay, but it is motorbikes and cars with massive exhausts which come by unexpectedly. This can really upset me. Have these sounds set me back?
I wouldn't know whether I wouldn't say that they'd necessarily set you back. I think the reason those sounds potentially upset people more is, even for myself, you're driving along, a motorbike comes up behind you, you just don't hear them coming, and then suddenly they've gone past, and it's loud, and it's that moment you know it's coming from behind you or in front of you. You know, you might see them coming, but it's usually when you don't see them coming that you have a stronger reaction, because you've not seen that sound, you've not seen the thing that's going to cause the sound coming towards you. So even with an ambulance, for instance, if you saw an ambulance coming, you'd be prepared for a much louder sound coming, whereas when an ambulance just pops up behind you, you jump out your skin, you're not prepared. With the big bore exhausts and the noise they make, I would say that they're not, you know, it depends on, I suppose, how often you're around those and things like that. But in the moment that they're going past or around you, they wouldn't be causing any more problem than any other traffic sound. That's probably the key thing with hyperacusis, is actually a lot of sounds that you probably think are damaging are not damaging. So patients that I've talked to, one young lad that I met 5 years ago and now is doing 10 times better, and he's had it since he was a teenager and he's now in his 20s. And when I spoke to him recently to try and find out all the things that he'd done, he talked to me about a decibel app that he got on his phone, so that when he walked into a room he could see how loud the room was. And he found that comforting, because actually he knew that when it was bad, he was like, I'm not going to go in, it's loud, I know it's loud, my phone's telling me it's loud. Whereas when he worried and he was like, oh, it's really loud in here, I think it's, you know, it's a problem, he'd bring out the app and realize that actually, no, it's not loud, it's within normal ranges, this is all good. And it actually gave him real comfort just to know that actually he's not at the damaging levels of sound. You know, when you're stood next to a plane that's loud, that will be in your, you know, especially if you stood next to a plane that was taking off. That's why you see all of them wearing the ear protection they wear, because it's exceptionally loud. but in that moment, those cars and those bikes going past, it's such a small amount of time, I think, that you would, it wouldn't be that damaging, because it's probably not as loud as you are perceiving it from a decibel point of view.
That's a great answer. That's what really helped me, Kathryn, and still helps me, is that I've managed to pretty much memorize, and I have a little card even that I carry around with me occasionally if I'm going away, which just reminds me, again, it's like it's a part of the tinnitus toolkit. It reminds me that most sounds really won't hurt me, so that if something happens, I don't need to get anxious on my holiday or not enjoy it because, oh my God, that's it. That's a week of torture. And it's really, really important what you've just said. I think, it's information, isn't it? And just arming yourself with that wonderful knowledge of things that can and can't hurt you. And that really does so much to the way that we react then to a loud sound. And then we process it in a different way. Whereas in the old days, I would think I was doing okay. So for 3 months, I'd do all right. And then a nail gun would happen right next to my ear in a garden that I was walking past. I thought that was it because it made my tinnitus worse. That was because I was heightened. The fight and fight response was really kicking in, and that would set me back. It felt like another month or two, but it stopped once I knew that didn't do anything. It was just me doing it. I was creating that with a fear response, which is, like you say, is natural to people with an oversensitivity to sound. Yeah. Nobody's doing anything wrong. It's just that we haven't been educated enough to know what we can and can't get away with in terms of sound. Thank you so much, Kathryn, for this evening. What are you working on next, Kathryn? What are you working on at the moment? What's your project you're doing at the moment?
So my project at the moment is to develop a online website to help people with hyperacusis, because currently there isn't one there. So this will be a website that has information and coping strategies to help people with hyperacusis. So it's aimed at kind of using at the GP level. So while you're waiting to be referred to audiology or ENT, you would be able to access this website and have a look at the things that you can do to help yourself while you're waiting for it to be investigated. So there's going to be different coping strategies and like you said, just some general information. So when I've spoken to patients, so I've spoken to probably over 30 plus patients now about this, what the needs are, and a lot of it is, can we just have some information on why it happens, what could be happening, and things that we can try. Because as Rupert says, you can have lots of things in your little kit, and that's probably going to be the key with hyperacusis as well, is having little bits and bobs that help you. So, you know, have your earplugs in your bag for when you need it, have the decibel app there, but also have other coping strategies. So a lot of patients talk to me about when they sit in a restaurant, they sit with their back to the wall, because then no one can come up behind them and make a sound without them seeing, which will then mean that they're not getting that reaction. They can see everything that's happening. So it's all of those sorts of things that I will be kind of putting forward on this website, but hopefully next year is when it will be there and starting to look at, and then we keep, the way in which my research works is we keep talking to patients and we keep changing it to make it better and keep putting it through. So the next 2 to 3 years is what will be going on there.
That's fantastic, Kathryn. And we will continue, and you keep supporting us as well. You're part of our advisory board, which we thank you so much for. And if there's anything that we can do, which we've spoken about, to help, we're so committed to what you're doing, Kathryn. Thank you ever so much. Thanks ever so much. And we'll come back in a minute, and I'll just do my little outro, Kathryn. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you for everybody for attending our T- online Zoom webinar. And please make sure to find us for further announcements, discussion group meetings and webinars. You can find us on our T- Tinnitus Wellness Support Community Facebook page /group, Instagram as Tinnitus-, and we also have our T- Tinnitus app, or our website, which is www.t-, and our next webinar will be on the 10th of August. Thanks ever so much. Thank you, Kathryn.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.